to be going live shortly. So 3, 2, 1, we are live. Hello, everybody. We are live. Today I have a special guest, a fellow by the name, how do I pronounce your last name? I'm not, is it Remillard or?
It's just like it sounds, Remillard. Yeah,
Okay, Remillard. So I've
yeah.
got Jason Remillard together with me today. A little different. Yesterday we had a crypto hedge fund guy, and today, Jason, you're more definitely like an infrastructure and tech guy. So, before we get started, Jason, you want to maybe take a second, introduce yourself, give us kind of a little high-level backstory, maybe take 2 or 3 minutes, talk about, what you do, what you're about, how you get into this space, and yeah, kind of the angle you're looking at.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Charles, for sure. I represent Data443, which is a publicly traded company today on the pink sheets. What we're doing as a company in general is, at a high level, securing data. Primarily in the enterprise context, that means, enforcing protection profiles, doing security reviews, handling things like GDPR, some of that, pure enterprise-y stuff. We're also dabbling quite a bit on the, net new product side, and especially the next generation stuff like the blockchains in general. Way back in the past, I was a miner in the old days, stuff running in the basement, all that sort of stuff. Made out okay, basically. Obviously, I'm not super rich from any of those activities, but certainly, it triggered a lot of, it reminds me of the old days of computing where you built your own machines and everything else. I think, specifically Bitcoin had that reward system built into it, money, which is always fun to do when you're tinkering with toys, and it gives you an excuse to buy more and more and continuously upgrade, right? So that was kind of fun. Most recently, I've been looking at the enterprise angles for blockchain in general. We've come out with a couple of announcements this year already. Specifically more around Ripple, to be honest, outside of any other blockchain at this point. From the Ripple's perspective, our view is that it's, pretty enterprisey in nature, very focused on enabling, a lot of these, financial services transactions, moving some of this data around that needs to go quickly, securely, and intra-party, right? So we like that ecosystem. Last week, just at the RSA show, we had made an announcement that we're the first data classification and governance platform for the blockchain. So available for demonstration, and happy to show it to anyone else after as well, is we're able to inspect blockchain transactions that we're allowed to. We have to be enabled and brought into that stream, but we're able to look at the blockchain transaction, read it, classify it, look for any sort of PII or sensitive data disclosure, and then tie it into the rest of our enterprise data reporting system called ClassiDocs, and start doing things like database triggers and alerts and these sort of things. So to us, from the ClassiDocs perspective, the blockchain and Ripple in this case specifically is just another data source. I think we can add a lot of value to those transactions. Look at the blockchain transaction, read it.
Wow. Well, that is definitely that's definitely quite a lot, and it's pretty dense. I come from, I actually have a background in B2B and enterprise technology, so I understand a lot of what you're saying. But nowadays, most of us, crypto types or whatever, we're more maybe a little more decentralist, methodology wise. We've escaped from the corporate plantation. We're living in a hut, we're on that side. So it's always fascinating to see this side, because ultimately, I'm intrigued at this because ultimately, the concept of anarchy is great and decentralization, but there still is the rest of the world. And, the enterprise applications for blockchain technology, decentralized, distributed ledgers and everything like that is probably, if we look at beyond the ideological side, that's probably where the money is. And, I'm also happen to be a capitalist, so I like to know where the money's at. And no, this will definitely Be good. So let's talk about this. So you've been doing work, I guess, for or with Ripple, and specifically, I guess your specialty is more on the security side. So you're like an infrastructure person. I noticed you mentioned you had, what was it, like a CISSP or a
Yeah.
CCIE or something like that?
Yeah,
Oh,
I've got a CISSP. I've been doing enterprise security for probably, I don't know, roughly 20 years, depending on how you calculate it.
hmm.
Really focus on identity and access management is kind of the niche I was in for a long, long time. And, you know, that's primarily big enterprise. But the story with that stuff is always about data synchronization, data integration, and keeping data clean and up to date, right? So in an enterprise context, you're going to say, well, someone's added to PeopleSoft. I'm going to make sure their mailbox is created and, you know, their access to the system. When they're offboarded, you know, that stuff is taken away. It's kind of the basic stuff around identity access management. It's come a long way, but still the basic block tackle stuff still needs to be done. So, you know, enterprise security really, you know, has this foundation around identity. I built Data443 in the product called ClassiDocs, primarily because I saw a real gap around data classification. And this is, you know, in an enterprise context or not, it's really about understanding what is in your content, where is it, and who's got access to it. You're seeing things like GDPR and these other sort of privacy regulations really driving a lot more focus on, you know, data classification, understanding specifically what is where, and in, you know, in the freedom context or the you know, other mindsets, it's giving power, you know, power back to the people essentially, right? And GDPR specifically states you can ask to be removed from data repositories that either you had approved in the past or you no longer approve of today. So you have a right to your information, you have a right to understand who's got access to it, what that organization's doing with it, and you can, you know, ask to be removed from processing. So I think, go ahead.
So this becomes an interesting thought, and I just had a thought pop in my head. And, you know, being an enterprise identity management security person, I suspect you'll have some opinions. So, you know, the classic thing is we want to, you know, in an ideal world, we separate business and personal, right? You know, business is one thing, personal is another thing, and, you know, we live two separate lives, we have two different cell phones, you know, who knows, whatever the heck it is.
Yeah.
But the reality of life happens where, you know, because I think we're human, we interact with people we know through business. Maybe we become friends. You know, there are people who have, you know, married people they work with, or, you know, like the interpersonal. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The interpersonal side definitely comes into play. Now, how does blockchain apply there? Because in many ways, I would look at this, you know, so the classic thing is if I'm a large enterprise and we're dealing with identity management, and there's an employee who was part of the entity. When the employee is no longer part of the entity, you know, a guy like you would come in, erase all their data or grab it all. The person would get, you know, would no longer need to have access to their stuff. In some instances, you know, people might be escorted out as, you know, they were ending their term or whatever, but that whole world gets cut off. And in many ways, there is an application for that, because I've known, you know, in my case, I've always been in a driver's seat. So I've never, you know, functioned as a, you know, I've never functioned as a employee, but I know for myself, 10 years later, I might reconnect with somebody from, you know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago and have a reason to talk to them because, you know, life has evolved or whatever on that side. And if I don't control my data, you know, that's irrevocably gone. Or in some cases, because, you know, over time, you know, we sold off a division of the company or whatever on that side. So we, you know, got rid of that mail or the domain, you know, these sorts of things happen. And how does that impact, you know, if you're looking at the enterprise side, the push on enterprise, as I've seen, has been away from, you know, has been towards blockchains, but they're all around these private blockchains. And, you know, I know I've literally thrown 5 different questions at you.
No,
so
it's
I'm
good.
kind of curious, you know, because ultimately I think, you know, how I look at this, and I think many of the audience that's listening in, we like blockchain, we like the distributed ledger, but we're all here for the money. We're all here to try to capitalize on a disruptive market opportunity. and trying to figure out, how can we poise ourselves to, get massive returns over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think, let's de-stitch this one.
Yeah, that's what, I understand. I literally
It's all
threw
good.
like things at the wall.
No,
And
it's great, and it's a great line of questioning, because these are all valid concerns and questions that enterprise and the consumers of enterprise, employees and customers, all have, right? Historically, it was a problem, for example, in a banking example, where if you were an employee of a bank and a customer, for example, you had a lot of lines crossed in that scenario, right? So separations of duty and access control and dual validations, and a lot of that stuff came out of, specifically that scenario. And now you're talking about how, I'm an employee, I have a personal life, but I use LinkedIn, and we share and correlate on information there too. And my customer is also my buddy, and all these sort of things. So I don't know if blockchain changes much about that. Certainly what we're seeing with blockchain in general is, again, this increasing push for data control. So while, Bank XYZ might have their own private blockchain for intra-branch transactions or intra-bank transactions, I do see the future where they'll use a blockchain for identity, and your identity might be attached to several different corporate blockchains, right? A good example of that is the work that was announced in Davos last year. Combination of, I think it was Accenture, Microsoft, and a few governmental sponsors have announced the ability to do a blockchain for identity, especially for folks who have a problem with identity, right? So
now, is that similar to what Civic is doing, or is this a different version?
I think it's not Civic. It might be Civic, or maybe it's changed names. I'm not sure. This is a little while ago, but
okay.
To me, it was a more far-reaching, worldly type of approach, whereas opposed to just speeding a $100 million wire transfer. Okay, what you do that doesn't do much for the world on a micro level, but some of these other blockchain technologies, I think, really are going to have an impact. So folks who don't have an identity or can't secure an identity, or what one person brought up to me, the fact that they do credit scoring, for example, for individuals, and I never knew there was something called a thin file for credit. And that is the teenagers who don't have a credit card, but they do have a cell phone, or, there's not a lot of accurate long-term credit data. These people need a credit rating for anything nowadays, never mind jobs and these sort of things. So these folks specialize in that area. So I think there's a value to having that information about the person, having them being able to control it, and being able to share it to other parties when they want to, when they don't want to, remove that information. And what we're thinking is that long-term organizations, instead of you having your record with the phone company and the utility company and the bank, you'll choose to share it with the phone company for 6 months and then remove it because you're no longer a customer. And the phone company, in a lot of cases, in GDPR specifically, means they can't retain this stuff, right? So it's you controlling when you share and how you share it. So how do we capitalize on this? I think it's just like any other sort of land rush scenario. Pretty well everything's open. You're seeing everything from transaction brokers to hardware equipment manufacturers and everything else are all getting into it. The blockchain business itself is pretty big. You got IBM and Microsoft and Google, all these guys spinning up the ability for your own blockchain, a corporate blockchain, or whatever else, right? So really, it's almost as foundational as the internet itself. It's a brand new network. Everything needs to be figured out again for it, from security and operations to uptime to availability to all these things need to be done for XYZ blockchain. And as you're seeing, there's a lot involved there.
So let's discuss or define, right? There's the concept of enterprise blockchain, which is more of a technology implementation to solve a problem, which is generally more private than it is public. Yeah. And then there's the concept of the consumer blockchain, which is manifested as some sort of, decentralized project that includes, usually some sort of a token that's traded on some exchange, or the anticipation of the token being on the exchange, that would disintermediate the need for trust and inefficiency in a particular market. Let's actually really zero in on the enterprise side, because this is something that, we don't really talk about that often. So you play in the enterprise side. So how does enterprise blockchain fit into all this sort of stuff? Like, is it just like another technology, and I just, is it just like a database, like the latest version of, Microsoft SQL Server, or, you know what I mean?
Right.
On that front, and
is it just another Hadoop sort of thing, or right? I think you can liken, on the enterprise side from a data store perspective, you can liken it almost to the good old days when we had, RDBMS, the relational database management systems, the Oracles and the SQL servers of the world, to the big data, the Hadoop, the Cloudairs of the world, right? So yes, it's a data repository. Yes, you can stuff into it. You can pull stuff out of it, but they're, fundamentally different use cases, and have different capabilities, just like a big data set database versus a normal database was. So yeah, you can have SQL Server go up to very big, but really, something that is, Hadoop oriented is going to have significantly different capabilities. And blockchain is the same way, from an enterprise perspective, even a small enterprise, let's talk small business even, there are values to that blockchain that might have, the ability to distribute digital products, right? And right from white papers to music files, or, we're seeing even some photography blockchains come up as well, right? So you're able to share that piece of content individually, involved, however you want to do that, at will, because you're the controller of that piece of data, right? One really interesting, use case or scenario for this as well is the whole IOTA, ecosystem, I guess you could call it, right? Where in this case, it's really about Internet of Things and sensor data primarily. And those folks who provide that information can license and sell the data that comes out of these devices. So say you own a large farming operation, and you have a lot of sensors out there, they do temperature, humidity, and all that sort of stuff, but you can sell that data back to, weather providers or fertilizer companies or whatever else. So I think, data is able to be reused several different ways. And I think we're finding more and more use cases for it as we go on. The explosion of Internet of Things, and devices, and the inordinate amount of data they produce will all be consumed differently. And I hope personally for good uses. There are definitely nefarious uses for a lot of this information as well. I think what's more important is, I hope that, the blockchain services that do survive the shakeout that we'll have in the next, 6 months, year, 2 years, are the ones that are the content providers, the ones who provide to the blockchain are in control of their data. So, it's something that you should have rights and permissions around that. So we're focused on that side, and, back to the identity management example, then, a piece of content on a blockchain owned by somebody is just like identity access management. It's just like a file share, a piece of content in your mail, whatever that happens to be. It's all about, enabling that service.
So expanding on that, I think, and it actually goes in line with, a project you mentioned that you were working on, the concept of one blockchain to rule them all has definitely is not realistic.
Yeah.
So we are, I think, the market, or at least I believe that, the future is a world of multiple blockchains, each with their unique ecosystem, so forth and so forth. And that then creates this issue of blockchain interoperability on that front. And you'd mentioned that, you've been doing a lot of, you said like API work with, different types of chains or through Ripple Validators. And I'm not exactly sure if I caught what you said.
Yep.
Can you kind of expand on that? And, let's talk about like, okay, so I've got a private blockchain, you've got a private blockchain, there's a public blockchain out there, how do you glue all this stuff together? Or, yeah.
And right back to identity access management, it was all about integration of data, right, from different repositories. In this case, yes, blockchain to blockchain to blockchain. That's just a data story, right? And you're very right. You're very correct. It is just APIs basically calling each other and doing things. When we did the Ripple work that we announced last week, it was the API was pretty straightforward for us to talk to. We had to be introduced to that transaction, which is fine. We have transaction ID and we have the crypto keys.
And can you just expand, because a lot of us aren't intimately familiar with what you did,
Sure.
Do you have some Ripple announcement? You're doing some sort of validation thing, or?
Yeah, so it's kind of there's two things we've announced with Ripple. So the first thing we announced, I think it was February, was that we were just running some validator servers for them on behalf of the ecosystem, not with them.
And what does a validator server do?
You would almost think of it as a miner, but there's no coin production or anything from our perspective, right? So in this case, we're just creating the ledger entries that the Ripple framework would utilize, using just extra compute power we are laying around.
Okay, so you guys implemented some type of a transaction node or something that will participate in the Ripple network.
Exactly. So, someone in Australia drops a transaction on the blockchain, it's got to be validated, right, by depending XYZ number of devices and providers. Mm-hmm. And we're just one of the nodes on the network in that example.
Now, how does that work? If you have a Ripple node outside of, hey, oh, it's kind of cool, or I got computers laying around.
Right.
Is there a business model to that, or you're just doing it for, kicks and grins, or can I start a Ripple validator, right? I've got something.
Yeah, no, anyone can, and they're free to, and I think that's some of the power of these networks is that, they are free and anyone can contribute to them. We add value to a certain transaction for a certain organization if they trust our validators to validate their transactions. So they could say, listen, Data443 is a company for, approving our wire transfers, for example, or confirming that they were sent or received. They're going to validate our transactions. Not much of a business model per se in the validator network from our perspective. There's two things.
So the validator, it's optional to, so if I understand correctly, and this is kind of interesting, joining the validator network, anyone can join, but just because you are on the validator network, someone on the Ripple network doesn't necessarily need to use you
or trust your validations, right?
Why would that matter, though? Because isn't the concept of a decentralized blockchain immutability, and I don't really care who validates it?
I think there's that ability, but there's also to have a higher trust for transactions as well.
Okay. And that's that's specific to the Ripple network, I guess, then, or?
I think so, not 100% on other blockchains. That's the way I understand that network works. Primarily for us, it was, yes, we have some spare compute. It was kind of, a fun little project for the guys to tackle. More importantly for us was to get introduced to the API specs, to their functional technical capabilities, and see what we could do with that. And that's what we did, 2 months, a month and a half, 2 months later, as we announced the capability of us, going into an existing transaction that's been entered, that we're allowed to look at. We've been approved to look at the transaction. We're able to pull that piece of data out and then do a data classification, a data governance action against it. So, in that case,
there was like an approval process to become a Ripple validator also that you had to go through, or?
In our case, because we wanted to be a validated validator.
There's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you can spin up a validator, in 5 minutes on your laptop, and that's it. You'll show up in their validator registry, but it's just a hash. You're not identified in any other way other than a hash and a node, and that's fine. We wanted to be, a little more public with that, so we sent our keys into the Ripple folks. They validate the keys against the nodes and say, okay, you are Data443, and this node is this node number. We'll have your name on there. Again, not really a big deal. Technically, there's no difference as far as I understand, but it's more of understanding the process and really feeling out some of these, new use cases around blockchain, right? For our interests are really around the identity of it and what we can do to help secure and govern, this new and expanding data universe. we've already wrapped up a lot of, the existing universe of, hard drives and data sticks and stuff on your laptop and stuff on servers and in the cloud. We've already done all that stuff. We've got, over 400 database types supported, all that sort of stuff. So we've done a lot of work in that area, but we wanted to bring the enterprise to the blockchain. And, when you think of the context, let's say a small bank or a small hospital has spent time saying, this sort of information to us is sensitive. Here are the rules, here are how they're defined, all that, normal enterprising stuff. Now they're going to use a blockchain for something. They need those same data rules to apply to the blockchain. So in a healthcare perspective, right, medical terms, address information, all that stuff is secured or governed by the HIPAA regulations. Well, if they start to use a blockchain to transact or move patient data around, that is another data source they have to secure, apply the same security policies to. So, for us, it's, Ripple was the first example. We're still going deeper on other blockchains. I think you won't see us doing too much with the consumer side, I think, some of the cryptocurrency side. I don't expect much activity there for us. Certainly, again, things like IOTA, some of these are other blockchains that have what I consider to be enterprise use cases, right? Even some of the other photography and digital content ones, I think, have an interest for us as well. So for us, it's really about bringing that enterprise stuff to the blockchain and securing it, just like you would a cloud drive storage system or any other piece of content within the business.
Okay, so your purpose of it is you see applications, today these are all networks and everyone's still laying plumbing, but as more and more applications start running on these networks, you see a future where a lot of these businesses are going to want to secure their stuff because no one wants all their sensitive data, whatever the heck it is, on a public blockchain for the whole world to see, because there's a variety.
They're regulated to control and secure it, right?
And
so
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like it's I don't know, think back to the days where Dropbox and these sort of things, cloud storage started coming out. There were no regulations really driving a lot of security controls around those capabilities. And, businesses that, they didn't even know they had it half the time. Their employees were using it, right? Now we're seeing, this data access, everyone's understanding the value a lot quicker. Certainly a lot more folks are demanding capabilities in this area. We're starting to see RFPs and stuff everywhere where, do you support blockchain in addition to, cloud storage and all these other sort of what I consider to be table stakes kind of requirements? People are starting to ask for this specifically. If anything, then to future-proof themselves as well, right? That's an important concern for them.
Interesting. Okay, so from your perspective, setting up these validators is strategic R&D for your company, so that your internal team and everything are, understand what you're getting into. So as potential prospects, so your customers would then be businesses who want to use the blockchain and need assistance or some sort of technology or some sort of product in order to secure their data. Is that kind of how you guys fit into the whole scheme of things?
Pretty close. Company XYZ is going to spin up their own private blockchain, for example. And they're going to want to extend their security policies that they have to do today onto this new data repository. So to them, it's, just like I'm saying, it's kind of just another data source and a data thing to manage. And it's no different than, other types of data sets. I think, what that looks like next year and 5 years from now, are going to be very different, even from today. What I'm expecting is, my futurist kind of hat on here is that organizations that want their own blockchains will buy or license from an IBM or a Microsoft or a Google or, XYZ provider, just like web hosting or something like that today. And they'll use that to transact. It'd be private or closed. It might be a hybrid scenario where, corporate data is on kind of one segment of it, and then, public customer type stuff be on the other side of it. And the whole concept of blockchain interoperability, I think, is really important. Just like today, you use your Facebook account or LinkedIn account or your your Gmail account as a login for other services. The same idea where you probably control your own, blockchain destiny or your own records to use that to interface with organizations. I really do feel like, in the future, I don't know how far it will be, that you have your own piece of content on the blockchain, you control it, and you choose to share it with organizations that you do business with or you have relationships with. You might share different information to your municipal government versus the tax authority versus your cellular phone provider, right? Those are all related to you, but they all have different segments of data, of your data as well. And you should be able to choose to unshare that information in the future. And I think that's one value of the blockchain, is that it does push the control, the destiny, the management of the data to the provider, whoever created that information, which would be you as an individual. And a lot of organizations really don't want to hold this stuff. I think with Facebook and the whole privacy thing, and then the EU stuff with GDPR, the liabilities are too high to hold this information anymore. And I know a lot of organizations, if they're going to transact with you, they'd rather just, keep a ghost or an echo of your information, that whatever is required to do that, keep that transaction running, for example. But they don't want to know everything about you. They don't want to hold everything about you. Certainly, the cellular phone provider doesn't need to know your gender or who your family is, right? But by virtue of this, what I call sloppy data work that's happening today and is really coming out, is very expensive and litigation risk for organizations. So how can your audience get in on the opportunity, right? I think obviously the cryptocurrency thing is very popular. I think the longer term play is the solutions providers who are going to be surrounding this whole ecosystem. Go back in history and look at these big transformative events in technology, all the way back from cellular all the way up to most recent big data and some of this other cloud computing. There is you don't have to be on the ground floor of a open sourced piece of code to be involved with the ecosystem. You can be involved with a hosting provider, you can be involved with a security or a data provider, a broker, right? Information broker. All these sort of things are all related to that piece of new technology. So I think there's lots of opportunities to jump in there, and I think we're just starting to see some of it now.
You're talking more picks and shovels rather than prospecting for gold. Interesting
scenario. Yeah. Maybe there is some stuff out there. I try and play the macro play more than the micro for me.
Wow. Oh, that's pretty cool. What about crypto in general? Now, you're obviously a technologist. Do you continue to invest, or do you watch the token stuff, or is it more of just a technology and a business opportunity trend for you that you're capturing, with your business strategy?
Personally, I've got everything invested in the business, so that's where all that is going. I watch it, more to see, looking for groundswell type of trends. We're seeing a lot of, obviously, Bitcoin specifically, around the holidays, right? That drove a lot of interest in blockchain. So I think that was, interesting for us to watch and understand, what folks were looking for, outside of pure speculation. It was, there are some, values to having your information private or your money private, or exchanging it, with other parties, or, sheaving into pieces and distributing it from there. So I think there's some really interesting use cases that drive out of, what I consider retail type of opportunities. And for me, it is more about watching the trends and understanding, what's getting people excited. That tends to drive a lot of, business behavior, So I think those use cases from the retail side have really been driven now into the corporate. And you're starting to see that now.
Cool. Alrighty. Well, wow. Well, hey, we've been on for quite some time right now. It's been a great conversation. for me, very educational. Any last parting thoughts or words before we sign off?
Well, thanks for the time, and thanks for everyone for watching. We do appreciate it. Just keep an eye out for some of the big players and what they're trying to do. If you're looking for opportunity, watch the big guys and the small guys drafting off the big guys. I think that's where you can see some really upstart, interesting things come out. And some of these new business use cases enabled specifically by the technology. So, if you look at the database world, big data really changed the way data was correlated, logged, and searched. Instead of just doing a forensic search against data for 6 months, that's all you could host in a database. Now you can go 15 years of data, right? And just infinitely larger. So that really changed a lot of the market and how that worked. And, I foresee blockchains in general having that capability as well. So look for some of the newer use cases and watch where the interest swings. I think the next few years will be very exciting in this area.
Wow, great. Well, thank you again, Jason, for your time. And the company you're with, or the company you're a part of, it's called Data.
It's Data443, just like it sounds. You go to data443.com. You'll see everything we have there, and we are a small cap listed company at the moment.
Alrighty. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time. Thanks for everyone else for tuning in. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.